Pacific Ocean, 1944. The air trembles with sound, a chorus of engines, gunfire, in wind tearing through aluminum. An American F-6F Hellcat bursts through a bank of white cloud, sunlight glancing off its wings. Below, a formation of Japanese Zeros twists in defense, tracers curling across the sky like burning ribbons. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's world is reduced to one thing, a glowing amber dot floating within the Mark 8 gun sight. No guessing, no leading the target by instinct. The sight knows. It calculates. The pilot keeps the Zero centered, and when the plane banks left, the reticle drifts, predicting where the enemy will be, not where it is. He squeezes the trigger. A short burst. A flash. The Zero disintegrates in mid-roll, consumed by fire and vapor. For the first time in air combat history, the machine has done the math faster than the man. And in that instant, as burning metal falls into the Pacific, a quiet revolution begins, the birth of predictive aiming. Because from this moment onward, American pilots wouldn't simply fire where the enemy was, they'd fire into the future. When the Second World War erupted in 1939, aerial combat was still an art form stitched together by instinct, courage, and human error. Pilots aimed their guns by feel. They calculated angles in split seconds, lead, distance, closure speed, all through muscle memory and adrenaline. At 300 miles per hour, the slightest misjudgment meant a miss by meters. The early years of the war were defined by this chaos, a deadly ballet of maneuver and chance. In the Battle of Britain, RAF Spitfire pilots used ring and bead sights, little more than transparent glass with a fixed circle. German Messerschmitts used similar setups. Dogfights became contests of anticipation. Whoever could read motion and react faster usually survived. The mathematics of combat existed only in the pilot's brain. But as the war escalated, the laws of physics began to outpace human reflexes. Aircraft grew faster, more powerful. Closing speeds in engagements often exceeded 600 miles per hour. In that brief window, a pilot had less than 2 seconds to align, lead, and fire. Most couldn't. Hit probabilities fell to single digits. Commanders took note. The Allies realized that no matter how skilled a pilot was, the human brain could not outcalculate velocity. The solution had to come from machines. By 1942, British engineers at the Royal Aircraft Establishment began experimenting with gyroscopic technology to predict an enemy's future position. The result would later become the Gyro Gunsight Mark II, used in Spitfires and Mustangs, a simple yet profound invention. The system measured the rate of target movement and automatically adjusted the aiming reticle. The pilot no longer guessed lead. The sight calculated it. What was once art became science. Across the Atlantic, the U.S. Navy was pursuing its own path. Their challenge was even more complex. Carrier-based pilots faced enemies at extreme angles and speeds, often in chaotic multi-aircraft engagements. The solution: a series of mechanical fire control computers that could calculate deflection, gravity drop, and bullet travel time. One of the most significant developments came with the Mark 8 gun director, a mechanical analog computer linked to naval anti-aircraft guns. Its core principle was predictive aiming. If you could measure motion and acceleration accurately, you could fire ahead of time and hit a moving target at range. Engineers understood that the same logic applied to aerial dogfighting. The battlefield was shifting toward computation, a contest of predictive precision. By mid-1943, the Allies were integrating this new thinking across every front. In Europe, bomber escorts needed it most. High-speed intercepts at altitude demanded a way to lead targets that were invisible to human instinct. In the Pacific, American naval aviators faced the same issue against agile Japanese fighters. The solution arrived quietly, In workshops and labs, gyroscopes, servos, and tiny motors that would turn human reaction into automated calculation. Each new sight shortened the time between seeing and striking. Behind this transformation was a deeper realization. The future of warfare would depend less on where an enemy was and entirely on where it would be next. The skies over the Pacific became a proving ground. Pilots began trusting their instruments, and with that, a new kind of confidence emerged. When they lined up behind a target, they didn't chase it. They aimed into the future, letting the mechanical predictor do what instinct never could. By 1944, this shift was complete. The Hellcats and Corsairs equipped with these systems were achieving unprecedented kill ratios. In some cases, U.S. Navy pilots claimed 19 victories for every loss. Technology was closing the gap between skill and certainty. The war had turned into a contest of computation, decades before digital computers would arrive. But the story didn't end with victory in the Pacific. The idea of predictive aiming, that a weapon could anticipate motion, would continue to evolve. As peace settled on the horizon, new challenges appeared. Faster jets, higher altitudes, and missiles that moved too quickly for human reflexes to comprehend. And once again, engineers turned to the same principle that changed the skies of 1944. Let the machine predict, and let the pilot decide. That evolution would define the next era of combat, one where analog gears would give way to circuits, and the art of leading a target would become a science of probability.
The final year of the Second World War brought with it the dawn of an invisible revolution, a silent transition from manual aim to mechanical prediction. Beneath the noise of piston engines and gunfire, the Allies were laying the foundations for a new age of computational warfare. In laboratories from Massachusetts to Hertfordshire, engineers dismantled the mysteries of motion. They built miniature analog computers, gears, cams, and gyroscopes that could solve equations faster than any man could think. These machines didn't just measure, they anticipated. The U.S. Navy's Mark 8 Director, for example, could track aircraft using angular velocity data and generate firing solutions that compensated for the ship's own roll, pitch, and yaw. It turned battleship turrets into precision weapons, able to shoot down aircraft at ranges that once seemed impossible. The same principle soon migrated into the air. The Mark 18 gunsight, introduced late in the war, combined optical targeting with gyroscopic computation. For naval aviators, it was a revelation. No more guesswork, no more intuition, only mathematics translated into light. Across the Atlantic, the Royal Air Force's gyro gunsight, Mark 2D, was making similar waves. Fitted to Spitfires and Mustangs, it projected a moving reticle that shifted dynamically with the target's motion. Pilots were trained to keep the dot on the plane, trusting that the computer behind the glass knew where the bullets would meet. Combat data proved its worth. By late 1944, U.S. Air Force pilots using gyro sights were scoring up to twice as many hits compared to those with fixed sights. For the first time, technology had bridged the gap between speed and accuracy. And yet the concept was still young. Engineers knew the next challenge was already forming: jet propulsion. Speeds were about to double. The air war of the future would be fought not at 300 miles per hour, but at 600, 700, even 800. Manual aiming, even with gyros, wouldn't keep up. When the war ended in 1945, both the U.S. and Britain had a trove of lessons. They had learned that prediction, not perception, decided survival. But how to translate this to the jet age was an open question. The first answer came during the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. American pilots flying F-86 Sabres met Soviet-built MiG-15s in the thin air over the Yalu River. Both sides were fast, agile, and deadly, But it was the Americans who possessed a subtle advantage: improved A1CM radar gunsights. These new systems fused analog computation with radar input. The gunsight measured closing velocity, altitude, and even atmospheric drag. A radar pulse tracked the enemy, while the mechanical predictor solved the set of equations in real time. The pilot's job was reduced to alignment. If the reticle stayed red, he could fire. The result was devastatingly effective. Despite similar aircraft performance, U.S. pilots achieved a 10-to-1 kill ratio against MiG adversaries. Predictive technology, once born in the mechanical sight of a World War II Hellcat, had matured into an integrated electronic brain. This new philosophy soon extended beyond fighters. In the late 1940s, the Navy's VT proximity fuses, the Army's M9 fire control computer, and the Air Force's radar bombing systems all relied on predictive logic, solving the future position of moving targets. The shared thread was clear: if you could measure motion, you could conquer uncertainty. By the mid-1950s, radar-assisted predictive aiming became the core of American doctrine. While the Soviet Union emphasized speed and maneuver, the United States invested in information, data-driven precision. The legacy of this thinking was profound. It led to the first air-to-air missiles like the AIM-9 Sidewinder and AIM-7 Sparrow, each guided not by pilot intuition, but by computers predicting future impact points through heat or radar reflection. What began as a mechanical dial in a gun sight had evolved into a predictive system stretching across radar networks, missile control logic, and pilot displays. In every engagement since the 1940s, the same invisible thread has guided American air power: the ability to calculate the future faster than the enemy can react. By the time the Vietnam War loomed, this principle was no longer experimental. It was doctrine. The pilot's crosshair, once a circle on glass, now represented the output of an entire system of computation, prediction, and control. What started with a small amber glow in a Hellcat cockpit had become the backbone of American supremacy in the air. And as the Cold War deepened, predictive aiming would evolve once more, from the analog age into the electronic battlefield, where information would replace intuition entirely.
1. The technological angle, the machine that could think ahead. Every revolution in warfare begins with a simple idea. For predictive aiming, it was this: the bullet should arrive where the target will be, not where it is. To achieve that, the Americans built machines that could solve equations in real time, long before the first digital computer flickered to life. These were mechanical brains, forged from brass, steel, and gyroscopes. The principle was straightforward, but execution demanded elegance. A moving aircraft introduced multiple variables: angular velocity, closure rate, gravitational drop, bullet speed, and target maneuver. The Mark 8 gun director and later airborne predictors used rotating gyros to sense rate of turn, then shifted the aiming reticle accordingly. Each component, every spring, gear, and cam, performed a mathematical operation. The sum of their motion became prediction. This technology embodied the American approach to warfare: industrial precision in service of human decision. The pilot still pulled the trigger, but the sight handled the mathematics. The man remained in command, yet his vision extended through the computation before him. It was the birth of human-machine symbiosis, decades before that term existed, and it would define the next century of combat design, where the line between instinct and calculation blurred completely. 2. The tactical angle, training for the future. Technology alone meant nothing without adaptation. Early reports from the Pacific revealed that some pilots distrusted their new gyro sights. They felt mechanical prediction dulled their instincts. But the Navy understood something deeper. Discipline was the new form of intuition. In training bases across Florida, California, and Guam, instructors drilled aviators not to chase targets anymore. They were taught to trust the reticle, to center the moving dot and fire in rhythm with its motion. At first, it felt wrong. The crosshair didn't point where the target was, it floated ahead. But when rounds struck home again and again, the skepticism vanished. The new tactics reshaped dogfighting itself. Instead of long, sweeping chases, pilots focused on maintaining stable tracking time, giving the predictor data to work with. The emphasis shifted from snapshots to sustained tracking. In combat, this meant American pilots wasted fewer rounds and broke engagements faster. A single controlled burst often replaced a long spray of fire. The skies became more deliberate, less chaotic, a battle of computation rather than chance. Over time, pilots came to describe the experience as an extension of thought itself. They didn't aim, they confirmed. The sight predicted, the pilot verified, and together they achieved something closer to certainty. That partnership between intuition and prediction became a defining element of American air doctrine. 3. The human angle, the calm within the storm. Behind every technological leap lies a human heartbeat. For the men who flew Hellcats, Corsairs, and later Sabres, predictive aiming was more than a machine. It was reassurance. Air combat was chaos distilled. A split second of hesitation could mean death. The noise, the G-forces, the vertigo all fought against clear thought. But the sight, glowing quietly on the glass, offered something constant: trust. Pilots spoke of it later with reverence. That small illuminated dot gave them focus amid disorder. In debriefings, they recalled how it seemed almost alive, moving smoothly, calmly, while the world spun around them. For many, it changed their mindset. Instead of reactive panic, they entered combat with composure. The machine didn't eliminate fear, but it gave them clarity. It also redefined what it meant to be skilled. The greatest pilots were no longer those who guessed best, but those who could interpret what their instruments were telling them. The future belonged to those who could read motion not as instinct, but as data. The psychological advantage was immense. Confidence bred accuracy, and accuracy bred dominance. Once predictive sights entered the cockpit, kill ratios soared, not because pilots became superhuman, but because they could finally act without doubt. This emotional steadiness, the quiet in the storm, became a signature of American aviators in every war that followed. 4. The strategic angle, from individual precision to national doctrine. Predictive aiming was never just a gadget, it was a philosophy. When American engineers created systems that could forecast motion, they unknowingly defined how the United States would fight for the next 80 years. From the Navy's gunnery tables to the Air Force's missile algorithms, one principle ruled: anticipate, never react. In WWII, that meant gyros and analog computers. In Korea, radar. By Vietnam, it meant missiles that thought ahead. Every generation of weapons built upon the same idea: predict, then strike. This mindset shaped training, research, and even procurement. The U.S. military didn't invest in faster planes just for speed. It built faster computers to outcalculate enemies. Predictive technology became synonymous with American strategy: fire once, hit once. It also introduced a subtle shift in command philosophy. Tactical flexibility, the ability to interpret systems under pressure, replaced sheer aggression. A pilot who understood prediction could dominate one who relied on instinct alone. From that realization came decades of design. AWACS networks, radar data links, and eventually the integrated sensor fusion systems of the F-35. Each traced its lineage back to that original glowing reticle, the machine that could see seconds into the future. By the mid-20th century, the idea had expanded beyond the cockpit. Engineers were already envisioning weapons that predicted trajectories across entire battlefields, from naval fire control to ballistic missile defense. And as the Cold War dawned, America's mastery of predictive systems would face its greatest test yet, a technological race against an adversary determined to match its precision. The question was no longer whether prediction worked, it was whether anyone else could match its speed.
5. The enemy's angle, facing the invisible edge. When the first reports of America's new gun sights reached Axis engineers, disbelief followed. German and Japanese pilots had long prided themselves on superior maneuver and reflex. Yet by 1944, they were facing something no skill could overcome, a system that predicted their every move. Capture aircraft told the story. Inside Allied cockpits, engineers discovered gyro mechanisms and rangefinders that automatically compensated for motion. German scientists at Rechlin and Peenemünde tried to replicate the technology, developing prototypes like the EZ-42 gyro gun sight for the FW-190. It worked, but too late. Production bottlenecks and material shortages crippled deployment. For Japan, the problem was even greater. The Zero, agile but lightly built, had little room for complex electronics or heavy mechanical sights. The Imperial Navy focused instead on maneuverability, a philosophy already outdated by 1944. In post-war interviews, surviving Luftwaffe pilots admitted the psychological toll of facing American or British fighters equipped with gyro sights. They could feel the difference. The enemy's fire was no longer wild or reactive. It was deliberate, almost serene. It was, as one pilot recalled, as if they knew where we would be before we did. After 1945, the Soviet Union inherited this frustration. During the Korean War, MiG-15 pilots discovered that even with superior climb rates and higher ceilings, their opponents, American Sabres, possessed targeting systems that turned every brief window into a lethal opportunity. The difference wasn't speed, it was prediction. 6. The engineering angle, from gears to circuits. By the late 1950s, predictive aiming had moved from mechanical precision to electronic intelligence. The age of analog computation was giving way to a new world of transistors and radar coupling. American engineers, many trained during the wartime boom, carried their lessons forward into peacetime laboratories. Companies like Sperry, Hughes, and Westinghouse built on gyroscopic logic to create lead computing radar sights able to predict impact points automatically based on Doppler returns. The principle remained unchanged: measure movement, predict intersection. But the methods became faster, lighter, and vastly more accurate. Where a World War II predictor used spinning gyros and camshafts, a 1950s gun sight used signal processors and servo amplifiers. This transformation reached a symbolic milestone with the introduction of radar-guided missiles. The AIM-7 Sparrow could calculate closing velocity and adjust its trajectory mid-flight. The missile itself became a flying predictor, a self-contained computer chasing probability rather than light or sound. Meanwhile, the simpler AIM-9 Sidewinder, guided by heat but refined through predictive logic, used control fins to anticipate target maneuvers milliseconds ahead. These systems carried the DNA of World War II's Mark VIII, the same mathematics of motion, now executed at the speed of electrons.
Even when digital computers arrived in the 1960s, they didn't replace predictive logic, they refined it. The U.S. Air Force integrated fire control computers into interceptors like the F-106 Delta Dart, where onboard radar and computers automatically computed interception points long before visual contact. The principle that began with gears spinning in oil had evolved into binary prediction, the same philosophy encoded in bits and silicon. 7. The moral and philosophical angle, precision and power. Every advancement in accuracy carries a shadow. Predictive aiming made warfare cleaner, faster, and mathematically exact, but also more detached. During World War II, the pilot still felt every shot, the vibration of the guns, the recoil, the chaos of battle. By Vietnam, radar and missile prediction distanced the killer from the kill. The crosshair became a symbol of absolute control, a calm, calculated act. This precision changed the psychology of combat. It reduced uncertainty, but it also blurred morality. When the machine predicts perfectly, human hesitation fades. Decisions once weighted with instinct and doubt became instantaneous. Historians later debated whether predictive systems made war more humane or more efficient. Fewer rounds meant fewer stray bullets, fewer civilian casualties, in theory. But it also meant fewer chances for mercy. The system never second-guessed. It never missed through fear. Within the American military, this dilemma evolved into a doctrine of measured certainty. Predictive aiming became a metaphor for American warfare itself, overwhelming precision guided by data, justified by efficiency. It was a philosophy that extended beyond cockpits and turrets. It shaped missile defense networks, drone strike algorithms, and even satellite-guided bombing. The technology once meant to steady a pilot's aim had grown into an empire of predictive control. In every generation since, the same question lingered. When prediction becomes perfect, where does humanity fit? 8. The legacy angle, the line to modern dominance. By the 1980s, predictive aiming was no longer a feature, it was the foundation of American air dominance. Every sensor, radar, and missile system spoke the same mathematical language: anticipate the enemy's next move before he acts. This philosophy culminated in the F-15 Eagle, a machine built around prediction. Its APG-63 radar could track multiple targets simultaneously and compute firing solutions automatically, guiding semi-active radar missiles to lethal accuracy. Later, the F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II took the concept even further. Their onboard computers fuse radar, infrared, and electronic signals into one predictive picture, a map not of the battlefield as it is, but as it will be. Every missile fired, every maneuver executed follows that same thread born in 1944: strike into the future. Even autonomous systems, drones, AI-assisted targeting, and hypersonic interceptors carry this inheritance. Prediction remains America's invisible weapon, the quiet algorithm that defines every engagement. From the amber glow of a gunsight in a World War II Hellcat to the digital symphony of data in a stealth fighter, the principle never changed. America learned early that whoever controls the timeline of motion controls the battle itself. And it is this mastery, not merely of flight or firepower, but of time, that still defines America's edge in the sky. That edge, however, would soon face its ultimate test, when predictive computation met the chaos of the jet age in real combat. The next battles would prove whether anticipation could truly conquer speed.
Korean Peninsula, winter 1951. 30,000 feet above the Yalu Rimmer, the jet age had arrived. The air no longer carried the growl of piston engines, but the piercing scream of turbines. Contrails stretched like chalk lines across the blue, paths of pursuit, interception, and death. In these cold skies, America's experiment in predictive aiming faced its reckoning. The enemy was fast, disciplined, and well-equipped. Soviet-designed MiG-15s flown by North Korean, Chinese, and often covert Soviet pilots. The aircraft was a masterpiece, light, high-climbing, armed with heavy cannon. Against it stood the F-86 Sabre, America's sleek silver answer, aerodynamic, jet-powered, and equipped with something the MiG lacked, the A1CM radar computing gunsight. This small, unassuming device changed everything. Hidden beneath its glass and metal casing was a radar rangefinder linked to an analog computer. When the pilot tracked a MiG, the system automatically measured distance and rate of closure. The reticle shifted in real time, leading the target precisely according to physics, not guesswork. To an observer, the duel looked even. Two jets spiraling, crossing, breaking apart. But inside the Sabre cockpit, the difference was invisible and absolute. While the MiG pilot fought intuition, the American pilot fought with data. He flew by numbers, and those numbers foretold the kill. The results spoke for themselves. Across the conflict, U.S. Air Force Sabre pilots claimed 792 MiGs destroyed against 78 Sabre losses, a staggering 10-to-1 kill ratio. Analysts later adjusted figures for exaggeration, but the dominance remained undeniable. The Sabre's predictive gunsight turned fleeting moments into firing solutions. It transformed aerial combat into a battle of algorithms. Pilots like James Jabara and Joseph McConnell, the first American jet aces, credited their success not only to flying skill, but to the sight's uncanny precision. You didn't fire on instinct. You waited for the light to tell you, and when it did, you knew. In the frozen clarity of those duels, predictive aiming proved its worth. The same principles born in World War II, angular velocity, time of flight, and deflection, now operated at near supersonic speeds. The analog computers, though simple by modern standards, performed miracles of mechanical calculation. The Cold War had just begun, and America had found its cornerstone, computation as a weapon. Through the 1950s and 1960s, that principle spread through every layer of air combat. Fighters, bombers, and even intercept missiles were now part of a predictive ecosystem. The SAGE, semi-automatic ground environment, an immense radar and computer system, allowed America to track and predict the paths of incoming Soviet bombers across the continent. It was predictive aiming on a continental scale. At the same time, American aircraft were evolving from trigger-based combat to guided precision. The AIM-9 Sidewinder, first tested in 1953, embodied this leap. Though heat-seeking in design, it relied on predictive logic to anticipate where a target's heat signature would be, steering toward that future point with minute fin corrections. The AIM-7 Sparrow, its radar-guided counterpart, calculated interception vectors from reflected radar energy, guiding itself through invisible corridors of probability. The weapons no longer reacted to targets, they predicted them. Then came Vietnam. For the first time, predictive systems were tested in dense, unpredictable airspace, jungles, mountains, electronic clutter, and human chaos. The early engagements revealed a hard truth. Prediction was only as good as the data it received. Early missile combat was plagued by unreliable sensors and restrictive rules of engagement. Pilots were forced into close-range gunfights once again. But by then, America had already foreseen this problem. Engineers had begun integrating lead computing radar gunsights like the AN-APG-30 and M61 Vulcan cannon systems, allowing pilots to combine prediction and raw firepower. When air-to-air missiles failed, predictive gunnery didn't.
The F-4 Phantom, initially designed without an internal gun, eventually carried the M61A1 Gatling cannon paired with radar lead computation. The lesson was clear. Even in the missile age, the human-machine alliance in predictive fire control was indispensable. American pilots learned to balance instinct with algorithmic trust, tracking targets through radar scopes, timing bursts to predictive cues, and trusting their instruments in ways World War II veterans scarcely could imagine. By the 1970s, predictive computation was no longer confined to individual aircraft. Entire command and control networks calculated future air positions in real time. Data from multiple radars and AWACS aircraft created a synchronized picture, not of the present battlefield, but of its next 10 seconds. This was the climax of a doctrine decades in the making, the power to anticipate, to dominate through foreknowledge. From the Hellcats' amber reticle to the Saber's radar sight, from the Mark 8's mechanical gears to the Sage Network's vacuum tubes, every machine pointed to the same truth. The side that could predict the future, even a few seconds ahead, would rule the sky. And as the Cold War entered its most volatile years, America's mastery of predictive systems would face its next test in the deserts and skies of the Middle East, where new generations of radar, missiles, and computers would prove whether predictive logic could still reign supreme.
Persian Gulf, 1991. The night sky above Iraq pulsed with invisible precision. Radar sweeps, encrypted signals, and heat trails filled the darkness. Somewhere in that sky, American pilots in F-15 Eagles and F-18 Hornets hunted opponents they would never see with the naked eye. When the first missiles were launched during Operation Desert Storm, predictive aiming reached its digital perfection. The logic that had once turned the gunsight in 1944 now guided entire fleets through layers of software and satellite communication. Each missile fired an AIM-7 Spiral, or an AIM-9M Sidewinder, or later an AIM-120 AMRAAM, carried the legacy of predictive thought. These weapons didn't chase heat or radar returns blindly. They predicted where the target would be at the moment of impact, constantly recalculating through microprocessors thousands of times per second. The results were devastating. Iraqi pilots, many flying older MiG-29s, Su-22s, and Mirage F-1s, were effectively invisible on radar for only seconds at a time. The moment they maneuvered, American systems updated. Every evasive roll or dive only fed data back into prediction algorithms. The missile didn't react, it anticipated. The kill ratio was overwhelming. The U.S. Air Force achieved air supremacy in the first days of the war, often destroying enemy aircraft before visual contact. It was the full realization of a dream that had begun with gyros and glass. But this was more than a technical triumph. It was a strategic transformation. Predictive systems now formed a network of foresight. AWACS aircraft mapped enemy movement minutes ahead. Radar warning receivers displayed trajectories before threats appeared, and satellites fed timing data to synchronize strikes across hundreds of miles. For the first time in human history, warfare itself was being fought on time delay. The Americans were fighting seconds, even minutes into the future. In the air, this meant no surprises. Every missile launch by an adversary, every radar ping, every flight pattern became part of a vast predictive web. The U.S. military wasn't reacting to war. It was conducting a real-time simulation of war as it unfolded. This capability, refined through decades of data-driven thinking, gave American pilots a sense of invincibility. The old chaos of dogfighting had become methodical, algorithmic, almost clinical. Pilots followed cues from heads-up displays, not instinctive glimpses through a canopy. Even the kill confirmations were detached. The missile left the rail, the radar blip vanished, the sky stayed quiet. Precision had replaced passion. By the late 1990s, predictive aiming was no longer about a single aircraft or missile. It was about integration. the doctrine evolved into what the Pentagon called network-centric warfare. Every platform, from AWACS to satellites to ground radar, contributed to a single, predictive map of the battlefield. Then came the next leap, the F-22 Raptor. When it entered service in 2005, the Raptor represented the culmination of 60 years of predictive evolution. Its AN/APG/77 radar didn't just track targets, it processed their speed, vector, and acceleration to forecast trajectories automatically. Its software could simulate how an opponent might maneuver next and cue weapon systems to respond before the threat even materialized. In essence, the aircraft thought ahead. Its radar cross-section was tiny, its sensors nearly omniscient. To its pilots, the world outside the canopy existed as probabilities, not objects, but predicted states of motion. Every turn, every engagement was computed as a future event. Against adversaries relying on older reactive systems, the outcome was predetermined. The logic extended into the F-35 Lightning II, the world's first fully data-fused fighter. Here, predictive aiming became inseparable from artificial intelligence. Sensors, radar, electro-optical targeting systems, and threat databases all converged to produce one unified picture, a projection not of the airspace, but its immediate future. Pilots no longer scanned, they interpreted. The computer analyzed thousands of data points, predicting not just where enemies were, but how they would behave based on historical flight data, missile kinematics, and radar patterns. Each trigger pull was no longer a decision made in isolation. It was the execution of millions of calculations, a predictive dialogue between human intent and machine foresight. This synthesis transformed air combat into something unrecognizable from its World War II origins. There were no more amber lights, no spinning gyros, no sight rings. The predictive reticle now existed within the pilot's helmet display, an overlay of reality, constantly updated, constantly ahead. Yet, despite the complexity, the principle remained pure. The future decides the present. From the Hellcat to the Raptor, America's strength in the sky was never just its aircraft or pilots, it was its unbroken belief in prediction. Each generation refined the same equation: measure faster, calculate sooner, act first. And by doing so, they transformed air combat into a contest of time itself. The rest of the world, from Russia's MiG-31s to China's J-20s, has tried to replicate that predictive logic, but the architecture of America's systems, built layer by layer since 1944, remains unmatched. As the Gulf War proved, and as every conflict since reaffirmed, whoever controls prediction controls airspace. And so, as the 21st century dawned and autonomous aircraft began to emerge, America carried forward that invisible inheritance: the ability to see seconds into the future, to let machines calculate destiny, to win before the fight begins.
When the smoke of the Gulf War cleared, the message was unmistakable. The battles that had taken weeks in previous wars were now decided in hours, not through numbers, but through precision, born of prediction. American air dominance wasn't just a matter of superior aircraft. It was the system, the integration of sensors, radar networks, and predictive fire control algorithms that turned uncertainty into inevitability. The rest of the world watched closely, measuring the gap not in hardware, but in time. During Operation Desert Storm, U.S. and coalition pilots achieved over 100 air-to-air kills with minimal losses, most without ever seeing their opponents. The AM-120 AMRAAM, guided by radar and logic, confirmed what the Mark 8 had hinted decades before. If you could compute faster, you could strike sooner, and you would win. Analysts in Moscow and Beijing studied the data with quiet alarm. The Soviet doctrine of massed formations and reactive interception was rendered obsolete overnight. The Chinese People's Liberation Army Air Force, still reliant on visual range combat and analog fire control, recognized that the battlefield of the future would belong to those who could predict trajectories across networks, not just cockpits. The Cold War had ended, but America's predictive supremacy was only deepening. The lessons of Desert Storm shaped every subsequent operation, from Kosovo in 1999 to Iraq in 2003, Libya in 2011, and beyond. In each, U.S. pilots relied on predictive systems to dominate not only the airspace, but the tempo of war itself. In Kosovo, NATO's air campaign against Serbian forces demonstrated the next phase, cooperative prediction. AWACS aircraft provided continuous updates, feeding data into fighters and strike jets. Targets moved, but the system anticipated. Enemy aircraft that lifted off rarely lasted 5 minutes before being tracked, engaged, and destroyed. In Operation Allied Force, out of hundreds of sorties, only 2 NATO aircraft were lost to enemy fire, both to ground-based systems, not air combat. The skies remained firmly in predictive control. The AM-120C, now the standard American Beyond Visual Range missile, operated like a thinking entity, constantly updating its intercept path using mid-course data from aircraft and AWACS. The predictive loop had expanded far beyond the cockpit. It now lived in the electromagnetic space between machines. Meanwhile, competitors struggled to close the gap. Russia fielded advanced systems like the R-77 missile and MiG-29 SMT upgrades, but the software integration, the predictive brain of the system, lagged behind. Soviet and later Russian doctrine still depended heavily on ground vectoring and pilot interpretation. America's edge lay not in a single weapon, but in automation of foresight. China, recognizing this, began investing heavily in predictive radar and artificial intelligence research after 2000. The J-10 and J-20 programs sought to replicate American-style sensor fusion, yet the architecture remained fragmented. Separate systems attempting to emulate what the U.S. had spent half a century perfecting as a single organism. By contrast, American fighters like the F-15C and F-A-18C were now fully integrated with digital data links such as Link 16, allowing instantaneous sharing of predicted target data among aircraft. When one jet saw, all jets knew. This networked prediction created what pilots called situational omnipresence, a feeling of knowing everything before it happened. Dogfighting in the traditional sense ceased to exist. The enemy was engaged long before closing range. Even within the U.S. military, strategists began to debate the ethical and strategic implications of such power. If prediction eliminated risk, what would come of human decision? If algorithms decided when to fire, how much of the war was still human? Yet those questions did not slow progress. By the 2000s, the predictive framework extended to drone warfare. MQ-1 Predators and MQ-9 Reapers employed target tracking software derived from air combat algorithms, systems that could forecast an individual's path seconds in advance, calculating firing solutions from half a world away. The same logic that guided bullets in 1944 now guided drones over Afghanistan. The result was a new kind of warfare, invisible, detached, but devastatingly precise. In the years following Desert Storm, America had not merely refined predictive aiming, it had woven it into the DNA of modern combat. What began as a mechanical advantage had become a cognitive one, a doctrine of total foresight. But with dominance came dependency. The system worked flawlessly only when its web of sensors and data links remained intact. In the emerging digital age, adversaries learned that the only way to challenge America's predictive supremacy was not to outshoot it, but to blind it. And that realization would shape the next era of conflict.
By the 2010s, the world's skies had transformed into an invisible chessboard of sensors, radars, and algorithms, all racing to predict faster than the other. For the United States, this was both its greatest triumph and its greatest vulnerability. Every war game, every real-world encounter confirmed the same truth. Predictive supremacy worked flawlessly until it didn't. As America's systems became increasingly automated and networked, adversaries shifted their focus from fighting the jets to fighting the information that fed them. In 2014, Chinese military doctrine formally identified information confrontation as a decisive domain. The aim was simple. If you could disrupt the predictive cycle, jam, deceive, or mislead it, you could make the world's most advanced fighter blind. Russia followed suit, building electronic warfare complexes like Krasuka-4 and Murmansk-BN, capable of distorting radar feeds and GPS coordinates. But for every countermeasure developed, the U.S. pushed prediction further ahead. At the Air Force Research Laboratory, engineers began integrating machine learning algorithms into targeting systems. The next generation of predictive aiming didn't just calculate motion, it learned from it. In simulators, these systems could observe thousands of hours of aerial engagements and identify patterns in pilot behavior, missile avoidance maneuvers, and radar tactics. The result was a combat network that didn't just anticipate, it adapted. By the late 2010s, AI-assisted targeting had entered operational testing. In 2020, during a simulated dogfight conducted by DARPA's Alpha Dogfight trials, an artificial intelligence agent defeated a seasoned human F-16 pilot in 5 consecutive matches. The AI's secret was not superior reflexes, it was prediction. It processed hundreds of possible trajectories per second, adjusting its lead angles before the human even began to move. That demonstration confirmed what the engineers of 1944 could never have imagined. Predictive aiming was no longer mechanical, nor even analog. It had become cognitive. In modern warfare, that principle drives every American system, from the radar-guided AIM-260 Joint Advanced Tactical Missile to the long-range hypersonic weapon now under development. Each one is designed to predict not only a target's movement, but its intent, drawing from data patterns across years of surveillance. The sky, once ruled by dogfights and reflexes, is now governed by algorithms and probabilities. The predictive architecture, AWACS, Link 16, sensor fusion, and AI, forms a web of foresight so intricate that no single pilot fully grasps it. Each jet, drone, and missile is merely a node within a predictive organism that sees beyond the horizon. For allies like Japan, Australia, and the United Kingdom, this doctrine has become the gold standard. Their F-35s operate within the same networked predictive grid, sharing real-time data with U.S. command centers. For America's adversaries, it remains the benchmark to beat and the hardest to match. But this dominance has come with an unintended consequence: the dehumanization of combat. When predictive systems dictate engagement, human intuition fades from the equation. Pilots no longer feel the chaos of dogfights. They witness calculated outcomes unfold on screens. Modern air combat has become a statistical event, cold, silent, and absolute. Where once tracer fire streaked through clouds, now unseen missiles strike targets guided by invisible logic. The emotional distance is profound. And yet, the same predictive logic that ensures precision also reduces casualty damage. Every improvement in targeting, from the gyro gun sight to today's AI-driven systems, has narrowed the margin of error. Civilian casualties, once unavoidable, have fallen dramatically in precision air campaigns. Technology, in its paradox, has made war both more exact and more abstract. As of the 2020s, America continues to refine predictive warfare into what the Pentagon calls decision dominance. The aim is not merely to shoot faster,
but to decide faster than the enemy can think. Whether through manned aircraft, autonomous drones, or space-based sensors, every layer of U.S. defense now operates under one guiding truth born 80 decades ago in the gunsights of World War II. The first to predict wins. And so the line stretches, unbroken, from the spinning gyros of 1943 to the digital brains of 2025. The same question that haunted engineers in wartime England, where will the enemy be next, remains the heartbeat of American air power. The answers now come in microseconds. And as the world stares upward at the sleek shapes crossing the stratosphere, one fact endures. America's mastery of prediction has not only secured its skies, it has redefined the meaning of control. Across 8 decades, one principle has endured. Prediction defines power in the sky. What began as a glowing amber dot in the cockpit of a World War II Hellcat has evolved into a networked, AI-driven system capable of anticipating motion across continents. The story of American air combat is not merely a story of aircraft, weapons, or pilots. It is the story of foresight made tangible. From the Pacific Theater to the deserts of Iraq, from the buzzing engines of piston fighters to the near-silent flight of stealth jets, the equation remains constant. Measure, compute, anticipate, strike. Every victory, whether a dogfight over Korea or a missile intercept decades later, is a proof of the same principle. Those who see the future first control the present. Yet predictive supremacy carries a quiet paradox. It has distanced human experience from combat. Pilots no longer rely solely on intuition. Machines translate instinct into calculation. The thrill of dogfighting has been replaced by the certainty of algorithms. Decisions once fraught with chaos and fear are now executed with the precision of microseconds. In this, there is both genius and estrangement. The human mind extended through gears, radar, and code, yet simultaneously removed from the raw violence it administers. And still, the moral and strategic consequences are clear. Prediction reduces error, minimizes collateral damage, and elevates survivability. It transforms warfare from reactive chaos into controlled precision. The battlefield is no longer a theater of chance, but a stage where time itself is weaponized. Looking forward, the principle of predictive aiming will continue to shape not only machines, but doctrines, strategies, and perhaps the very nature of warfare itself. From mechanical gyros to AI-driven networks, the lesson endures. Mastery is not in speed alone, nor in firepower, but in foresight. In the quiet cockpit, amid the hum of electronics and the glow of targeting displays, one can still feel the legacy of 1944. A dot of light hovering in space, pointing toward the future and reminding us that in the skies, as in history, seeing what comes next is the ultimate advantage.